Hi everyone, welcome to the Sky this month for November 2023. My name's Paul Martinaitis and this show is brought to you by the Astronomical Society of South Australia. So I hope you've been able to get your telescopes out or binoculars out and do some viewing now that the nights are getting a little bit warmer and clearer. It's a really good time of year in terms of the sky. As we'll see, there's some wonderful objects to take a look at. In particular, if you're interested in galaxies, we have Sculptor and Fornax, very well placed amongst others for observation. And also the outer planets are all lined up nicely, pretty much in a straight line. So Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus and Neptune are all quite high in the sky and well placed for viewing. And in particular this month, both Jupiter and Uranus are coming to opposition. So, as usual, we'll begin by starting with a tour of the night sky. So we'll take a look at the night sky as it'll appear on the 10th of November, and the time is around 10 p.m, so that's about half an hour after the end of astronomical twilight. So hopefully it'll be nice and dark where you're viewing. So, now that we're well past the middle of spring, fast approaching summer, we can see that the night begins with Scorpius already halfway below the horizon, followed closely by Sagittarius, Scutum and Aquila. Looking a bit higher up though, we can see that constellations such as Pavo and Indus, Grus and Aquarius still very well placed, fairly high in the sky. So Aquarius, you may recall, we covered in the September show as constellation of the month. So we looked at a couple of objects, including M2, NGC 7009 or the Saturn Nebula, and the Helix Nebula. So, and of course there's the planet Saturn in that constellation at the moment as well. So while you're taking a look at Saturn, if you haven't had an opportunity to look at those other objects, or you want to have a relook at them, still a very good opportunity to do so. And looking further up, as we said, Grus, very high in the sky at the moment. So there's a lot of nice galaxies in Grus, including of course, the Grus Quartet. And really at the zenith is a very relatively faint constellation of Sculptor. And there's a lot of nice galaxies there as well. And we'll take a look at this region of the sky a bit later in our constellation of the month segment. So looking to the north now, and we can see this part of the sky is really dominated by the flying horse Pegasus, which is another one of these nice constellations, which, a bit like Orion and Scorpius, that actually kind of look like the thing they're supposed to represent. And you can see in particular you've got this square in the middle, looks really huge on the sky, the Great Square of Pegasus. And there's a lot of really nice galaxies in Pegasus. One in particular I'd like to point out to you is one of my favourites, which is NGC 7479. It's a great galaxy because you can sometimes see some detail in it, and also it's easy to find, which is nice. So to find it's very easy. All you need to do is to go to the top left-hand star of the Great Square, which is Markab, and then you just need to really follow that line in the square. If you go up about 2 degrees, that should put you right on NGC 7479. So this is a relatively faint galaxy. So it does need very dark skies, and you probably need a 6 or an 8-inch telescope or above to get a reasonable view of it. But because it's so easy to find, it's certainly worth a try while you're out there. And through my 12-inch, what I can see is I can see a bright core. I can see that bar that you see here. And sometimes if the night is really nice and transparent with averted vision, I can see that arm there hooking around to about there, around that bright star. So to me, it looks like kind of a sort of a faint hockey stick with a dot sort of halfway up the stem, which is the core of the galaxy. I can't, however, see this arm here. That's much fainter. So that's why it's one of my favourites. It's easy to find, and I also enjoy galaxies where there's a chance that I might see some sort of arm structure in them. And this is certainly one of those galaxies. And the other galaxy, of course, is Andromeda, what part of our local group, almost as big as the Milky Way galaxy. And it also has the distinction of being one of the furthest objects that you can see with the naked eye. So to find Andromeda, it never rises very high for us in the southern skies, but this time of year is pretty much as good as it gets. So good opportunity to seek it out. And it's also really easy to find if you haven't seen it for a while or not sure where to look. Again, all you need to do is identify the Great Square of Pegasus. This time we're going to start at the lower right-hand star here. And all you need to do is really just follow along. So we follow along from that star there. We go 1, 2 to Beta Andromedae. And then you'll see a line of 2 fainter stars coming this way. So you just need to go to Beta, follow that line of stars 1, 2, and that will put you right where Andromeda is. So the best way to find it initially, at least, is to look in binoculars, because it's so close. For a galaxy of that size, it's only 2 million light years away, which is very, very close for a galaxy. Its apparent size is very large, so it actually makes quite a good binocular object. So that kind of shows you the scale. This is the view through a pair of 10 by 42 binoculars. So you can see there it takes up, virtually half the field of view. So under a dark sky, a good pair of binoculars, particularly if you can steady them with leaning your arms or on a tripod, can be a very good way to view this galaxy. Alternatively, also if you want to take a look in a telescope, you'll probably need to use as low a magnification as possible, just so that you can fit it in and get some contrast with the background sky. And while you're at it as well, don't forget to take a look at its 2 companion galaxies. There's a fairly bright one on one side, M110, and there's also a fainter one, M32, nearby as well. And another galaxy that really you shouldn't miss at this time of year is M33. So that's also sometimes called the Triangulum galaxy. So that's a really one of these grand design face-on spirals. Again, very large apparent diameter, but because it's a face-on spiral, it's quite faint. So it does need a really dark, transparent sky to get a good view. And it's pretty easy to find. Again, you can just start from Beta Andromedae, go over to this star here, which is Alpha Triangulum. And if you follow that line between those stars about 2/3 of the way along and up a bit, you should see M33. So if you're looking under some decent skies, just scan across with your binoculars from Beta towards Alpha Triangulum, go up a little bit, and you should be able to find M33. And you can also see that's a little bit further away than Andromeda, and under a good sky you can see that with the naked eye as well. So that is probably the furthest object that most people would be able to see with the naked eye. So again, that shows you kind of the size through binoculars. And this also is a good object to take a look at in a telescope. So this shows you through a 12-inch telescope at fairly low magnification. I normally look at it through my 24mm, so I would see that kind of size in the field, so relatively low magnification. And on a really good night, you can see a bit of a hint of the concentration in the middle of the galaxy. And these arms, you just see a sort of a faint sort of glow. So it sort of looks like a sort of a distorted S shape. So you sort of get an impression of one arm sweeping this way, and you can kind of get an impression of these arms sweeping this way. And that little bright area you see there is a hydrogen alpha region. So it's a little bit like the Orion Nebula. And you can also see that as a bright knot in that arm. So that always fascinates me, this particular object, because besides the Tarantula Nebula, this is one of the largest emission nebula known. In fact, I think it might be even a little bit bigger than the Tarantula Nebula. So it's just fascinating to see a nebula like that in a galaxy that's so far away. So turning towards the east now, and now that we're approaching summer, we can see Orion is almost above the horizon at this point. So if you're out there, towards midnight or 1 a.m., Orion should be, become high enough to get a good view. Same for Taurus and Canis Major. They're just sort of starting to peak above the horizon. A little bit higher up, Eridanus is really fully visible now. So it starts all the way from Orion in the northern part of the sky, snakes all the way across the sky to the south, ends in Achernar. So a lot of great galaxies in Eridanus, and also some other objects such as planetary nebula. So one in particular that you won't want to miss is you might want to take a look at NGC 1535, which is a very popular planetary nebula. So finally, looking towards the south, we can see Carina has started to pop above the horizon. So we haven't seen Carina and the associated Argo Navis constellations for a little while now. So they're starting to emerge. Of course, not very well placed at the moment, but as the summer progresses, and particularly towards next spring, they'll become very high up in the sky. A little bit higher up, Dorado is now quite high in the sky, so we can start taking a look at some of the nice galaxies in Dorado, including, of course, the Large Magellanic Cloud. Higher up still is the Small Magellanic Cloud. A lot of nice objects in the cloud itself, including the foreground object, of course, 47 Tuc, probably the best globular in the sky. So we'll now take a look at the lunar calendar for November. So, of course, daylight savings is well underway here in Adelaide, which makes things an hour later still, as well as the days generally getting longer. So on the 1st of November, astronomical twilight ended, or true darkness began at around 9:22 and went right through to 4:38 in the morning. By the end of November, you'll have to wait to about almost 10 p.m, so about 9:50 before true darkness begins, and it will go right through to about 4:16 in the morning. So the dark period where the moon won't interfere is relatively long for this month as it works out. So it started on the 1st and it will go right through to the 15th. You could even extend that a little bit depending on how late you want to stay up. So by the 15th, I think the moon is setting at about 10 or 11 p.m. But if you're happy to sort of wait until midnight, you can extend that time even up to perhaps Saturday the 18th. I think there the moon sets at about midnight or 12:30 or so in the morning. Now the moon phases. So last quarter was on the 5th. New moon will be on the 13th. First quarter is on the 20th. And full moon will be on the 27th. So it's a really great time of year to be planetary observing, particularly the outer planets, which we'll take a look at in a second. But let's start with the interior ones. So we can see Mercury begins November in conjunction behind the Sun. So if you want to take a look at Mercury, you have to wait until around mid-November, let's say the 15th or the 16th, where it will start to emerge and come out in the early evening sky. And then as November progresses, it should become easier to see as it moves further away from the Sun. Venus, on the other hand, spends all of November in the morning sky. So if you want to take a good look at Venus, that'll be well positioned in the time just before the sun rises through to early dawn. Mars, on the other hand, if the Mars season wasn't well and truly over anyway, because it's too far away and too small to really see any detail, it's now spending all of November in conjunction behind the Sun. So let's now take a look at the outer planets, and that's really where all the exciting action is occurring. And you can see they're really all nicely lined up. So really in the same evening, you can start by viewing Uranus, which comes to opposition on the 14th of November, Jupiter, which came into opposition on the 3rd of November, where it will reach its maximum size of almost a whopping 50 arc seconds. So it's a very favourable opposition, and I think 49.5 or 50 arc seconds is pretty much as good as it gets in terms of Jupiter's size. So excellent opportunity to continue to take a look at Jupiter. Moving along the line, Neptune is also still very well placed after its opposition in September. And last, of course, but not least, is Saturn. As we saw in the solar system overview, Venus is going to spend all of November as a pre-dawn early morning object. So this shows you on the 10th of November at around 5:20 in the morning, where Venus will be joined by the moon. So the moon will present a nice, beautiful, slender crescent, and Venus will be at a little bit over half phase. And if you want to take a look at Venus and see that phase, you can use binoculars, provided that you can steady your hands enough, or even better, use some sort of tripod, or any sort of telescope. And provided that the sky is clear enough and the seeing is steady enough, it is still fairly low towards the horizon. If the seeing is steady enough, you should be able to see that phase of Venus. Moving now to the evening sky, and this is really where it's all happening with the outer planets. This shows you their relative positions as they'll appear really throughout November. Their relative positions aren't going to change a lot from our point of view. So beginning on they form kind of a line. So beginning on the right, there's Uranus, then there's Jupiter, moving along to Neptune, and then finally Saturn. So Jupiter and Saturn, I don't need to talk a lot about. There's plenty to see on both planets. Of course, they have their family of moons. The Jupiter moons, the Galilean, so-called Galilean moons. They move around the planet very rapidly. So it's interesting to follow their various patterns that they make throughout the month. And there's also a number of events that occur. For example, you have transits and shadow transits as they pass in front of Jupiter. And occasionally they're also eclipsed by the shadow of Jupiter, which means they can suddenly disappear or reappear as they move into or out of Jupiter's shadow. So that's always something to look out for. And of course, Saturn, again, in addition to its beautiful rings, also has its own family of moons which move around throughout the month. So let's take a look at Uranus and Neptune. So we'll take a look at Uranus first. So that comes to opposition on the 14th. And at this time, it's relatively easy to find as well, because you can see if you draw a line between Jupiter and the Pleiades, it's about halfway along that line. So it's particularly easy to find at the moment. So you can either start at Jupiter or the Pleiades, sort of make an imaginary line. If you scan across halfway, you should be able to find it fairly easily. So I'll just zoom into that region a bit there. So it's almost, pretty much halfway across. So it's magnitude 5.6. So technically you could see it with the naked eye if you're under a nice dark sky. Certainly it should be easily visible in binoculars and also any telescope. So just like Neptune, generally you won't, well, you certainly, I think for Uranus, won't see any detail through a telescope. But it still looks like a nice, if you use enough magnification, you'll see a nice little greenish sort of ball, and like a little disc. And also it has got a number of moons you can look at as well. They are fairly faint. I think they're about magnitude 13.5 or fainter. So you'll need a fairly large scope to see them, but they're worth looking out for as well. So last but certainly not least, in my opinion, is Neptune. And that hasn't moved a lot from our point of view since we last looked at it in September. So it's still quite easy to find near the circlet of Pisces. So we'll just zoom in a little bit and I'll show you how to get there. So there's the circlet of Pisces, sort of makes that sort of haystack shaped ringlet of 6 stars. So I would start with that star at the peak, at the top of the ringlet, which is Gamma Piscium, a fairly bright star at magnitude 4.5. And then I would hop about 4 degrees up to 20 Piscium. So that should also be visible with the naked eye under a dark sky. Certainly will be visible through your finder scope. So once you find 20 Piscium, if you just move a little bit to the left by about 2 degrees, you should come to Neptune. So Neptune itself, lovely planet to look at in my opinion. I've always preferred it to Uranus even, I think because it has that nice deep blue colour. And you might also wish to take a look for Triton. So in the September show I presented this diagram, so I've just updated it for November. So if you've got a fairly large telescope, let's say a 10-inch or above, it's probably worth giving a go. Relatively faint at magnitude 13.5, and it's also very, very close to Neptune. So you can see there, that shows you the field of view through the 12-inch at 270 times, and that kind of gives you an indication of the scale, how close Triton will be. So it's very helpful to know which side of Neptune to look at. So I've updated that elongation table for November. So these are the dates where it will either be at the furthest point north of Neptune or south of Neptune. So they would be the best evenings to look for Triton. And it also indicates which side of the planet you should look at. So to work out what direction you're looking at, what the best way to do it is to just let Neptune drift through your field of view. So you may have to switch your drive off if it's a driven telescope. And then what you do is look at which direction it's drifting in, and that will be west. So once you've determined where west is, if you're using a reflecting telescope, such as a Newtonian reflector, then north will be 90 degrees clockwise to that drift direction. So as I've shown in that yellow arrow, so if the drift direction is towards the right, north will be at the top and south will be at the bottom. If you've got a Schmidt-Cassegrain or a refractor with some sort of star diagonal, well then the north-south will be opposite to what I've shown in that with that yellow arrow. So hopefully that will let you know where to look for Triton. And also just note with the red arrow there, there is a relatively bright star, magnitude 11.9, which is kind of will sort of hang around in the vicinity of Neptune throughout November. So just make sure you don't get tricked by that. You can see it's relatively reasonable distance away from Neptune, but also at magnitude 12, it's considerably brighter than what Triton will be. So good luck with that. Triton's certainly a very satisfying observation to make once you catch it. So this month I'd like to talk about 4 really nice deep sky objects, some of which I'm sure you're already familiar with. And we're going to find those objects at the top of Cetus and also into Sculptor. So we're sort of looking in this region of the sky, which is really nice and high up and well placed at the moment. So our first object is going to be NGC 246, sometimes known as the Skull Nebula. And it's quite easy to find. So here we have Cetus, and you can see Cetus has this triangle of stars at the top. There's Beta Cetus, quite a bright star at magnitude 2. And the Skull Nebula is right there. So it's pretty much, once you've located that triangle at the top of Cetus, it's pretty much halfway along the base. So this is a really interesting planetary nebula. Its surface brightness is reasonably high, but not as high as some of the smaller planetary nebula. So it does certainly require a nice dark transparent sky. But given that, and it also responds very strongly to a filter like most planetary nebula, particularly an oxygen-free filter. So through my 12-inch, for example, using an oxygen-free filter, I can actually see much of the detail you can see in that photograph. So it looks like a fairly large grey circular disc, quite faint, but then out of one side of it there's kind of a huge chunk sort of bitten out of it. So it almost looks like a Pac-Man shape. And around the rim I can see some of that enhancement, and you can also see those stars kind of dotted through the middle. It almost looks like they've pierced that halo. So it's a really interesting object to look at. So our next three objects, they're going to be found very nearby, and they're all in a line from Beta Cetus through to Alpha Sculptoris. So if we start at Beta Cetus, and if we just follow that line along about a quarter of a way, we come to our next object, which is NGC 247, which is a really nice galaxy in Cetus. So this galaxy, I've given you shown you two images here. The one on the top right kind of gives you more of an impression of what you'll see through the eyepiece. So it's this lovely tapered halo, and it looks quite misty, with a slight brightening in the core. So it's relatively close galaxy at 11 million light years. But you can see there its surface brightness is quite dim at 14.1. So again, this is certainly a galaxy that you need a nice dark sky to get a good look at. And also you might notice in that lower photograph here, you can see some smaller galaxies along here. So they're known as a Burbridge chain. So I've never seen these through my 12-inch telescope. But apparently they can be seen, I've heard reports of them being seen in a 16-inch telescope and larger. So that's certainly something I'm going to try and search for very shortly. So if you have a larger telescope, whilst you're looking at the fine side of NGC 247, be sure to take a look nearby and see whether you can see these tiny little galaxies making up Burbage's chain. So our next object, I think I don't need to introduce to a lot of you. So we're now moving along about 3/4 of the way along that line between Beta Cetus and Alpha Sculptoris. And this object here, of course, is NGC 253. So really familiar to most people, I think, but I had to mention it at this time of year. It's so well placed for observation. And it's actually part of the same group as the previous galaxy we saw, 247. They're actually gravitationally bound to one another. So you can see that 253 is at a similar distance of about 11 million light years. So this galaxy was actually discovered by Caroline Herschel, William Herschel's sister. And you can see it's quite a bit brighter than 247. Its surface brightness is almost a magnitude brighter at 13.2. And also notice the size. It's a massive 30 arc minutes by 6.9. So bear in mind 30 arc minutes, half a degree. So that's actually about the size of the full moon. So for a galaxy, that's massively long. And it will be a fantastic sight really in any sort of telescope. So you can expect to see that beautiful tapered halo. You may or may not be able to fit it in your field of view depending on what sort of magnification you're using. You'll see a brightish core, and in a larger sort of telescope you should start to see some of that mottling as well, which represents those dark lanes which are sweeping through the galaxy. So it's really a fantastic sight, one of the jewels, probably the jewel of the galaxies in that region of the sky. And our final object I wanted to show you is NGC 288, and that's actually, I'm sure some of you would have seen it. It's quite a new object for me. I only saw it relatively recently, about a month ago. I was looking at 253 and I noticed 288 in the atlas, and I thought I'd have a look. And it's actually a really nice globular cluster. I was really surprised at it. It's not one of the brighter globulars. It's fairly faint. So I've kind of shown you a photograph here, and here's a sketch at the right. So it's like a class 10 globular. So that means it's fairly loosely concentrated. So it looks like a distant grainy sort of open cluster in a way. But what I really liked is it's kind of surrounded by 5 or 6 quite bright stars. So you've got this misty sort of partially resolved globular cluster in the middle, and then you've got these framed by these lovely 5 or 6 bright stars that appear around the edge of it. So it's a really, really fine field to look at. Thank you very much for joining me in today's show. I really appreciate it. I hope you found the information interesting and useful, and I hope you get some good viewing in November. So I look forward to seeing you in the December show. So until then, bye for now.